Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast, is for anyone interested in leadership and the wins, losses, and lessons of being an executive. We are two women who have successfully navigated C-Suite roles and are sharing our experiences. We will be bringing on guests to tell their stories and want to spark honest conversation and discussion, which may include swearing and lots of laughs. Join us on this adventure.
Well, hello, this is Susan, and welcome back to another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. Today, we are going to talk about some leadership challenges inspired by what's happening to and in the U.S. government, pretty much as we are recording this. There's so much that's happening, and we can't help but think there's things to discuss and leadership opportunities to consider. So that's our theme for today. And Juliet is here with me, even though I'm talking as if she isn't.
I'm here.
She's definitely here. This is a duo podcast. We don't have a guest. We have been thinking about some themes that we wanted to bring to the podcast and realized that the best format for that was just the two of us talking about those themes. So this is our first one, I think, ever in, certainly in season 2.
Yeah, except for our opening episode and our ending episode, which we do as a duo as well. But we're going to do a couple more of these during season 2, just because I feel like there's so much to talk about. So
it's so much to talk about. And One of the things I was sharing with Juliet before we started recording, first of all, let me pause and say, hey, those of you who are joining us now, thank you so much for tuning into our podcast. We are so thrilled with everyone who's told us that the things we talk about and the way we talk about them really resonate. And so we're just absolutely delighted that you're here. So as I was saying, before we got on the call, I was sharing with Juliet a letter that went out to all of the alums of my undergraduate institution about the executive orders affecting higher education. And the way he started the letter was to talk about things happening on campus and said, in many ways we're settling in, but actually settling in remains difficult. And both Juliet and I, as we were chatting about that, really resonate with this. It's been really hard settling into 2025.
It really has. We were, as we said earlier, we had a lot of ideas about how we were going to just rise above it all and we were going to continue on our path. And in ways we are, because we're still checking in with each other and we're still committed to accountability. But the start and the kind of the 2 steps forward, 3 steps backwards has been happening through the 6 weeks of this new year. And so we're encouraging each other to really try and kind of be curious and instead of fearful, which I think some of that fear and anxiousness is causing this 3 steps backwards way of living. But it's also giving ourselves some grace and realizing that everybody's having this hard time, which I loved that letter that you shared with me from your college, is that we all need to acknowledge that this has been hard and it's unusually hard. It's not normal hard. So
and in a lot of ways, life is still going on. Life has to go on, even as we deal with kind of what does this mean and what are the implications. So it has been definitely hard.
Yeah, I was with my parents the other night, and my father is definitely living in the rabbit hole, as I call it. And I was just really trying to encourage him to not watch so much news, but he's having that challenge of, I want to be informed. I don't want to not know what's going on. Yet it's making him a little crazy, and he's not sleeping well, and that's not healthy. And I tried to encourage him to take more breaks, but that is all to come. The results of that conversation.
I'll be interested to know, because one thing that I will cop to was recognizing between 2016 and 2020 that I had a little bit of an addiction to the news in the sense that like every day it was something new that was mind spinning. And yet I kept going to look for it. And I realized that I really needed that there was something happening biologically. There was like the dopamine hit, even if it wasn't a happy dopamine hit, about following things so closely. And I realized back then that I couldn't live that way. It was really having a terrible effect on me. Part of my overall nervous system healing. This is not good for my nervous system.
100%. So anyway, we are going to continue to practice the curiosity instead of fear, and we'll keep reporting out on how that's going.
Yeah,
for sure.
So our theme today, and then I'm going to sneak in a slightly different approach to it. Our theme for today's podcast is responsibility without authority. And we have some specific things in mind that we're observing going on in the government, and also wanted to share where we have come up against that particular experience and some choices we've made or not made, as the case may be. But I did want to say, Juliet, and I don't know if this is part of your leadership lexicon, right? I was always told that one of the most important things about leadership was to be predictable. To your team so that they would know not only what you expected, but how you were going to react if they met those expectations or if they didn't meet those expectations. And I certainly think when it comes to the market, that running a business with the basis of predictability is sort of essential. So I wanted to throw that out because in this way, the leadership that we are seeing coming out of Washington is not in the least predictable. What's your reaction to even that tenet that leaders should be predictable to some degree, to a great degree?
I agree with you. I use the word consistent. I think that they're, a consistent approach, a consistent way of showing up is super important as a leader, and good leaders are consistent. I think that oddly, what's happening in Washington is that a lot of the media is reminding us that we were warned. We were told exactly what was going to happen, and that is what's happening. So in some ways, it is consistent. It's just that I think a lot of people felt like, oh, it's just rhetoric. It's just, words. It's not really going to happen. It's not going to affect this or that. And so I think part of it is paying attention to the patterns and not having your head in the sand too. Part of it is like, yeah, this is exactly what we were told was going to happen. And here we go. We didn't expect it to be the way it is happening. And so, yes, it is definitely not predictable, but it is exactly
totally predictable,
Exactly. I mean,
funny, as you're saying this, I'm like,
yeah.
How could I possibly even suggest that it wasn't predictable? It was totally predictable, and yet it's...
Well, we knew it would be a shit show. We knew it would be a shit show no matter what, right? So we have that. So anyway, again, trying to look for the lessons in what's going on here. And one of the things is, when you're looking for examples of leadership, you have to look for both good and bad. And there's a lot of examples of bad leadership going on, in my opinion. And one of those things that happens is this idea of being responsible for something, but not having authority, and how challenging that is. And to me, that is kind of that inconsistency where you're getting a lot of responsibility, but in the end, you can't say no. You can't say, that's not right. You can't say, the emperor has no clothes if you want to keep your job. And that is tricky. And it happens a lot in leadership. And it's happened to me several times in organizations that I've worked in where we were moving in one direction and I thought we were all on the same page. And then, I've always been in the number 2, number 3 spot in my C-suite career. And having that direction shift, either because a new leader comes in or a lot of times it's out of fear. I think it is out of, a leader's fear and not wanting to, continue on a path because something in them has changed or something in the environment has changed. And they want to take a turn that is something I don't agree with and or don't want to be responsible for.
Can you be more specific about a situation? Because you said before we were actually recording that this has happened several times in your career.
Sure.
A situation where the direction changed and you didn't agree. So what was the flavor of the disagreement? Was it, I don't want to put this in your hours.
It was, I am a person who really wants to reward. When I go into an organization, I focus on rewarding people consistently. So consistent rewards for folks. So for instance, a bonus program that maybe was not, was very discretionary and didn't have structure to it. So when you have something like that happening in a leadership role and you have a bonus program and people don't know what they're working towards. So it's a discretionary bonus program. At the end of the year, you're like, this person gets this and that person gets that. And, it's based on your feelings about the person and not your feelings about the person's work. And I believe that everyone should know what their compensation is going to be or can be and what the rules are around that and what they need to achieve and, what are the goals involved and what's the North Star of the organization and really having structure. And I was in an organization recently where everything was discretionary. And it wasn't just about how much money they had at the end of the year, which can be, a really important part of a bonus program. But it was really up to like how much this person was liked and how much they were, toeing the line and so to me, it's like you set those things at the beginning of the year. So people are working towards something and they know, hey, I could either be at this level or this level, and I know what it's going to take to get me there. And so being in a situation where it's discretionary, and so I was in an organization and I'm moving them in structure and building kind of this infrastructure and a bonus program that would allow everyone to understand kind of what range they could qualify for. And at the end, rug was completely pulled out from under me on that. And not only did I have to talk to my own team about it, but they were looking to me, that I did this, that this was something that I made a decision about. And when that has happened to me, and that's not the first time something like that has happened, I do toe the line. I do say, this is a leadership decision. I don't throw one person under the bus. And we're trying to be better next year, and just trying to temper it, but this is kind of how things played out. But I'm looking for a new job at that point. Yeah. Then I'm, I may say, this is a leadership decision and be very, try and be as collegial as possible, but I'm ready to walk away at that point. It's like, this is not fun. And not that your job is going to be fun every day, but part of a bonus program is to motivate people and excite people. And when people don't feel good at the end of that, then you really are defeating the whole purpose. So that's just one example. I mean,
you've not only not motivated them, you've probably demotivated them. So it's definitely, dollars ill spent.
Right. Exactly. Or 3 people are happy, but the other 60 are not, so.
It's a really good example of that. I've been thinking lately, this week in particular, by the time if this recording launches when we expect it to, it will be just a few days after reading in the news direction and 2 attorneys at the Department of Justice and some fairly high-level, visible resignations. And I've been interested just in that conversation about resignations being sort of the last thing you can do to express your dismay. And a resignation letter that calls out that behavior. And there've been a few of those. It sounds like, Juliet, just to bring it back to you, that in this case that you just described about the bonuses, you didn't resign in a bold final move. You very quietly started looking for a new job because this wasn't the organization you wanted to be a part of.
Exactly. And it might be called quietly quitting, because I think that was a theme for a little while, but it's not quietly quitting, because I still feel like I'm invested in the people and investing in making the place a better place and making sure what I can control is clean and, documented, and I'm not leaving the place a mess. But it tells me a lot about where the organization is heading, and it's not heading in a good direction. And I don't want to be part of that. And it's not a sinking ship. It's just not going where I want to go. And I've been lucky enough to be able to find that next gig when I've had these moments of like, okay, I've done what I can do here. And it's generally after several years. It's not like I'm coming in and not liking what's going on. I'm coming in and trying to affect change and trying to talk with leaders about what they could do to make things more consistent, to document things, to communicate better. And then it kind of hit a bit of a wall, and like, okay, I've done what I can do here. And that's why I've worked in a lot of different places, I think, in a lot of different industries, because I do hit a wall at some point. So,
yeah. Have you ever been put in a very bold question? Have you ever been asked to do something that was legally out of bounds or unethical?
No, I mean, yes, I have been, but I've been able to say and use the law or an audit or, luckily as a CFO, I'm generally in charge of compliance, and I can push back on that. There has probably been a couple situations where taxes might be iffy, but luckily I've not been the person who's submitting the taxes. We have auditors and we have tax accountants that would, help with that. So, I think that for the most part, it really is about, I'm able to use compliance in my position. I had a couple situations in the nonprofit sector where donations were coming in that would have been like caused undue influence in the organization. And there's definitely ethics around that. So for instance, someone who wants to donate money to a specific school to benefit their specific kid, you can't do that. You can't deduct that as a donation when it's directly affecting and benefiting your kid. So I had to push back on that and say, we can't do that. And, again, generally because I'm in this role of compliance and, I did say at one point, the CFO goes to jail. So, no.
That's motivation to not do something that doesn't serve right with you.
I was accused of 911ing a little bit too much, but hey.
I was thinking about that question for me, and I realized that I've never been asked explicitly to do something unethical or unlawful. But my objections, and when I've really felt that tension of responsibility without authority, was often in the style. It was often in the way in which we were going to implement something. And it's a kind of a slippery slope, because it's not really about what we were trying to do. That was legit, but the how we were going to do it was not legit. I mean, in some ways, you can say that about your bonus structure. It's legit to have a bonus structure. What doesn't feel legit is that some guy in a smoke-filled room is making up his mind based on, or her mind, based on whether they like the people who are going to get the money, right? So that's the thing that I think is trickiest as leaders. I know there are places, I know there are times, and we're seeing this in Washington, where people are asked to do unlawful and unethical things. And when that happens, I think we all have to know where our barometer is for that. But what's really interesting is how we as leaders navigate those situations where the thing itself isn't wrong or bad, but the how it's going down raises all kinds of either personal or principle-based qualms. I'm trying to find the right terminology.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's this, I'm working a lot in my coaching practice with emerging leaders. And a theme that I am coming across is this fear of being fired. Like the fear of being fired is motivating people more than the desire to stay in the job. But it's like, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to have this responsibility without authority, and I'm going to accept it because I don't want to get fired. And I get that. And I was in that position. I think and I'm hoping that people who are in the C-suite are able to kind of look beyond that. Because I think that that's a really solid place to get to, where you're making decisions not because you're afraid, but you're making decisions because they're the right thing to do, or it's ethical or lawful. And those folks that have resigned, I think they're U.S. attorneys, maybe they're district attorneys, but the folks who have resigned, it takes a lot of bravery to say, I'm going to be one step ahead of you. I'm actually quitting. You can't fire me. I quit. And being in that position, I think, is really important when you're in the C-suite, is to be able to be in that position. So you can say those things. I have had the luxury, because I wasn't in a multi-layered organization like you were, the kind of quasi-government, or I don't know how you call it, a government-adjacent organization, where I could see other places and see other, like, oh, okay, well, I don't like this. I'm going to live with it until I find the next thing that I'm going to do. And not that I always ended a job because I didn't like what was going on. A lot of times I ended a job because I felt like I had done my work there and I was ready to go do my work somewhere else. So anyway, I'm interested in your kind of look back a little bit on where you had those moments and the desire to stay within this organization, because there was not a golden parachute, but it was something at the end where there was a reason for it.
They called it golden handcuffs. Yeah. Handcuffs. This crap. Where the payoff or the benefits at the back end are such that it's worth staying there. Interestingly enough, my moments of, call them crisis, happened long before I was close to that. So that didn't keep me there. It's interesting. And what I'm thinking about is who I was at the time and who I am now. And what I work with my clients on is knowing that part of the work that we do as an executive life coach, I work with them on their work challenges, their personal challenges, anything that's coming up for them, because it affects how they show up, is helping them know the kind of person that they are. So it's not necessarily how do I make decision A versus decision B. It's like, at the end of the day, who do you want to be? So how do you think of yourself? What is your self-concept around your leadership? When you're 90 and you're thinking back on these years, how do you want to say you did? Your own assessment of that. And when I look back on who I was when I was 40, I did not have the self-confidence. I knew who I was, but I didn't have that framework that, let's face it, age and experience makes a huge difference to knowing the kind of person that you want to be. It's wasted on the young, unfortunately. And yet 40 isn't so young. But I do know that a lot of the decisions that I made that I look back and say, I wish I had said, nope, not doing this. And I'm like Juliet, going to be looking for a new job, whether I said that out loud or not, was really, in fact, based on just personal doubt. It wasn't like I was afraid of being fired. I was too good at my job to be fired. I kind of knew that, which is ironic, but I didn't know where I could land. I didn't have a sense for the gifts I would bring another organization.
Interesting. Yeah. That's an interesting, different kind of perspective of that moment where you kind of have a decision to make, or you might have a decision to make, and not being able to see beyond your current situation. Like, how does this apply out there in the world? And I remember that feeling early in my career. I had worked for an organization for 6 years, and I was so afraid to leave because I didn't know who I was, in that same way. Like, I don't know who I am out in the world. And I was not in the C-suite at all at this point, but I left that job and I ended up having 4 jobs in 4 years. I learned how to quit. It was kind of interesting, but I realized when I look back on it, it's like, I learned how to quit a job in this time. Like, this doesn't work for me. I'm quitting. This doesn't work for me. And then I found a good job that I stayed with for 6 years. But I think there's part of that is not having that muscle, right? Not having that muscle of quitting and looking for a new job because you've been somewhere maybe you were there for 15 years at that point, right? And so thinking about, wow, how do you make a change like that? But it's worked out for you.
It has worked out for me. And while we're doing the personal reflection thing, the person I am now, I mean, I do wish I had been more adventurous. I was adventurous in a way, but I wasn't adventurous in that I didn't have the self-belief, if you will, to stretch or to leave. But the person I am now, I sort of feel like I'm making up for lost time, right? I feel like I am constantly at the edge of my own personal growth and professional growth. My husband has been away, as you know, Juliet, for the last month, and I have been running the lodge and the farm all by myself. And it's not hard. It's just a capacity issue. I mean, yes, it is hard. There's some things that are hard, but that's a lot to do in one day as one person. And
absolutely.
I was reflecting with him the other night on the phone, and I said, I am truly experiencing this growth spurt. And I love it because I know that when you come back and we figure out role distribution and that kind of thing again, I will look back on this time and realize how much I learned about myself and the ways that I was able to show up because I had to. And it's interesting, I'm 64 this year and thinking about, I like being at my growth edge, not always at the edge of the edge, but in that zone where every day is a new adventure and you're learning new things and making that sort of thickening my life experience.
That's so great. We're both in a certified coaching training, different ones right now, but in our training, it's called the stretch zone, and living in that stretch zone and finding joy in it instead of that fear, but like, oh, wow, yeah, I'm really pushing the edges here. And, I'm taking on clients where I'm having to figure a lot of things out and they're in crisis and I am the calming force and just showing up for other people in different ways than I had expected to. So I think that's really cool. And I'm really proud of you, by the way. I was nervous for you, I have to say, when you said you were going to be alone for 6 weeks or whatever it was in the middle of nowhere in South Africa. And I'm just really proud of you. I want to say that.
Oh, thank you. That's really great. And the irony is I haven't really been alone. We had guests almost the entire time. And some of that time I was hosting without staff, which meant getting up at the crack of dawn to make breakfast for 4 guys who were leaving the house at 5:30. But the other times I actually had staff on hand and they could get up at 5:30. So that was good. I'm realizing, Juliet, and our listeners probably have figured this out already, is that we're kind of drifted from our responsibility without authority topic in a way. So I'm going to bring us back, which is we kind of got in this conversation about realizing that and maybe I'm just going to express an opinion, that part of what happens to a person is the insight, the awareness that you are being held responsible for something that you don't have authority over. And what you do next depends on how solidly you feel about your own value system and about your own approach to the situation. And we're seeing that when people make bold resignation decisions because they're being asked to do something unlawful or unethical, that's them showing up as their full self. And so many times, as we've been talking, it's not that clear.
No, and I think how it all ties in is that living in your stretch zone. So doing the right thing, doing the thing that feels right to you, even though it might be scary, it might end up in having an unintended consequence, it might end up not working out, but it might end up working out. It might do well, and trying to live on that side of your decision of, I'm going to do this because this is the right thing to do for me, and I am going to live with the consequences, and I can handle it. I can do that. I can do hard things, as a lot of good leaders talk about. One of the things that I think we talked a little bit about in either other episodes or just you and I talking is really about work styles. And this is something that we'll talk about in another episode, probably dig deeper into work styles in another episode, because you and I have kind of put together a potential leadership training program that is about work styles and having people learn how to work together. And I think when you're in your situations, especially in the C-suite, super important to understand how other people approach work. And sometimes the issue you're having with your peers or your, CEO, in my case, is this idea of work styles and how you approach problem solving and how you approach work. And so I think sometimes it's important to take a step back when you're being pushed and think about, this might just be a style thing. And maybe we need to think about that a little bit differently. I don't think that's applying in Washington right now, but I think in our examples, there can be some of that in there too.
I think a little bit it does apply in Washington. There's definitely a style that is a style. That was a little bit, that was a sliver. There's a part of what I was saying when that sometimes we object not to the underlying objective or the ask, but the way in which it's being communicated or developed or laid out for other people to understand. And that often has a lot to do with work.
Good point. Yeah. Dictator is a style. So let's just say that.
A dictator is a style. I have to say, Juliet, this has been really fun to just kind of dive into a topic and see what we unearth. And they've observations
I think it's great.
And shares here.
Well, I just want to encourage leaders out there to look for real-time case studies. This is a fascinating time. Again, you can go to fear, but curiosity and fascination with what's happening out there. The people who are stepping up and saying no and standing by their ethics. Really great examples out there. And also an opportunity to think back on how you've been in these situations before where you've had a lot of responsibility without authority, and making sure as a leader you're not doing that and putting people that work with you in that situation, and being really considerate of how that can backfire and make your organization, weaken your organization, I guess would be a say.
It's so interesting that you're bringing this up now, Juliet. We're at the end of our episode, but I think that's a fascinating thing to look at it from the other side, how we as leaders inadvertently put people who work for us in a position of having responsibility without the authority. we give them an assignment, and then like we can't help ourselves. We get in there, we micromanage, we nibble around at their ankles. And I think that's another thing I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I actually thought about it that way. We're so busy looking at being done to. Sometimes we learn best what's done to us when we pass it on, which isn't necessarily a healthy thing.
And honoring the work that's being done on our behalf, I think is really important as leaders. So how do you want to show up? I'm encouraging people to be curious and don't go down that rabbit hole or live in the rabbit hole for sure.
For those of you out there who, like us, are finding 2025 a little difficult to settle into, please know you are not alone. And speaking for both Juliet and I, we are so delighted that you are following us and listening to us on this podcast.
We are. And I just want to encourage people, if you have a topic you want us to talk about in our we're not solos, in our duos, we'd love to hear from you. It would be great to have anything you're seeing out there brought to our attention, because we're always looking for things to talk about, that's for sure. Good seeing you, Susan.
Good to see you, Juliet.
And thank you, everybody, for listening.
We're so glad you've joined us for this episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. In the meantime, please tell your friends and coworkers about us, and be sure to follow, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed listening. Secrets of the C-Suite is produced by Juliet Clothier, Susan Sutherland, and Brian Clothier. Original music is by Brian Clothier, and the podcast is inspired by leaders like you.